Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to the Harborne Islamic Study Circle, HISC Seerah session 171. Inshallah, we'll be continuing with the battle or the conquest of Mecca. So this is our fourth session on the conquest of Mecca. And just a quick recap. The first session we talked about in terms of why it happened, and this was that Banu Bakr were massacred by Khuzah, who were allied to the Quraysh, and then Amr ibn Salam from the Khuzah, he went to Medina to seek revenge on behalf of the tribe, and the Prophet gave him assurance that they would support their grievance, and the fact that the Treaty of Hudaybiyah had been violated because of the actions of the Quraysh and their allies. And so the Quraysh dispatched Abu Sufyan to try and patch things over, but then he was given essentially no audience and didn't get any positive response about extending or renewing the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. Prophet then sent an ultimatum to the Quraysh, which they rejected, and they didn't think that the Prophet would actually then go through and plan anything so substantial as an invasion. But the Prophet, he orders the Muslims to prepare for war. So they gather about 10,000 people to fight. And essentially the day before they're leaving, he informs them that they're going to Mecca. And when that happened, one of the elite Sahabi, Talib ibn Balta'ah, he fought alongside the Prophet in Badr, in Uhud, and we'll talk about that again in a second. He treacherously tries to tip off the Quraysh for the sake of his mother or other members of the family that are in Mecca. So he's an outsider. He has not got any strong tribal allegiance within Mecca, and he fears that should the Muslims invade, there may be repercussions on his family because they're not going to be protected by anyone. Nevertheless, Jibreel alerts the Prophet ﷺ, who dispatches Ali and another Sahabi to intercept the letter. And then they return with the lady who had it hidden in her hair, and she was an unwitting accomplice to this treachery. Hatib is hauled in front of the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahabi, and he confesses. And then Umar immediately says, "Let me chop off the head of this disbeliever." Prophet ﷺ says, "Let me hear what he has to say." And then he explained the situation that he wanted to protect his family. And then Umar says, "Well, let me cut his head off because of his betrayal and treason." At which point the Prophet ﷺ says that, it might, don't harm him. It might be that Allah has looked favorably upon the people of Badr who attended Badr, and said, "Do whatever you please, all your sins have been forgiven, past, present, and future." And then Allah revealed the verses in the Qur'an which prohibit alliances with the enemies that are intent on destroying Islam. And then we talked briefly about some of the lessons that we can learn from this error that Hatib made. This error in judgment, the all-encompassing nature of Allah's knowledge, and how even elite people, Muslims, can make mistakes, but they, as long as they seek forgiveness and learn from their, things, may not go back to normal, but there's no. Prophet he banned any reprisals or repercussions, or in fact anyone from even mentioning this error of Hatib. The importance of verifying the news, of checking. So even when you've got the evidence there, you need to hear straight from the accused what happened and why it happened. We talked about the prohibition of treachery and helping the enemies of the prohibition of helping the enemies of Islam, and how some people take that out of context even nowadays, some of your jihadi groups. And then we sort of finished off with the status of the fighters of Badr, and they are of the highest ranks amongst the Muslims. And then I just sort of went back this week and just sort of got a couple of other instances of Hatib in the Seerah. And so we talked about how he fought in Badr, but I don't think there are any or authentic accounts of his actual fighting in the Battle of Badr, what he did. But there is plenty of his heroics in the Battle of Uhud. And again, this is the time when Khalid bin Walid, he was routing the Muslims, and the Prophet ﷺ had very few people around him. And we talked about this in the study circle many months ago. And then he called some of his, most of the Muslims had fled. And those that were around the Prophet ﷺ, he called them, and they sort of formed a shield around the Prophet ﷺ. And amongst those elite people, there was Abu Dujana, the chap with the red headband. There was Musab ibn Umair, and we've talked about him before. Ali ibn Abi Talib, obviously. Someone called Sahal bin Hanif. Malik bin Sinan, who is the father of Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, who is another famous narrator of hadith. There was Amara, Nusayba bin Tikab al-Muzayniya, Qatada bin al-Numan, Umar bin al-Khattab, and Hatib ibn Abi Balta'ah, as well as Abu Talha. So these, this was the posse that formed the physical shield around the Prophet ﷺ, as Khalid and the other people in Uhud are trying to kill the Prophet ﷺ. And then another story of Hatib during Uhud. It said that Abu Dujana, he stood before the Messenger of Allah, and he was, protecting the Prophet ﷺ with his body, and protecting the Prophet ﷺ from the arrows that were being shot from behind. And Hatib ibn Balta'ah, he followed Utbah ibn Abi Waqas, who was the Qurayshi who broke the Prophet ﷺ's tooth. And so Hatib followed him, struck him down with the sword, cracked his head, and killed him. And it's also said that Sa'd ibn Abi Waqas was keen to kill his brother Utbah, but could not get up with him. However, Hatib got up with him and managed to kill him. So these are just some of the stories, again, just showing the level of who Hatib actually was, and how even these prominent Sahabi can fall in and make mistakes. And again, we'll do another really famous story, inshallah, when we do the Battle of Tabuk. So that's the story of Hatib. Obviously, he learned his lesson, and he made valuable contributions to the Muslims and Islam after this. So now the news is out. They're off to march to Mecca. They've done all the preparations, and they're setting out with 10,000 soldiers. And it said they set off the 9th or 10th of Ramadan. So this is during Ramadan. This is the 8th year of Hijrah. And the Prophet, as he always does, he leaves behind somebody to look after the affairs of Medina, because you can't just leave it completely ungoverned and unprotected. And he left Abu Ruhm Kulthum ibn Hussein al-Ghifari to look after Medina. Again, he's not a prominent Sahabi, but you have to have somebody there, because all the leading and prominent Sahabi, they're obviously going for the conquest of Mecca. A couple of things happened before they got to Mecca, and inshallah we'll talk about those today. One is they're literally a day or two having left Medina, and they reach a place called the Valley of Juhfa, and they see somebody coming towards them. Who do they see? Well, they see the Prophet ﷺ's uncle, Al-Abbas bin Abdul Muttalib. And Al-Abbas, he's with his family, and he's obviously making hijrah, and he is the last of the people to make hijrah to Medina. After this, after the conquest of Mecca, there was no more hijrah. So he was given the esteemed position of being the last of the Muhajir in the time of the Prophet. So this is Al-Abbas, who is the uncle of the Prophet. So Abdul Muttalib's one of his children. So the Prophet sees him and greets him, obviously. And there's some difference of opinion of when Al-Abbas actually became a Muslim. But nevertheless, we'll come on to that in a second. The Prophet just basically said, come. He's obviously very happy. And then so basically go straight to Medina, sort yourself out, leave your family there, find a place for them to stay, and then come join us quickly. And again, they're just over a day or two from Medina. So Al-Abbas manages, because he's just traveling with his own family, manages to go there quite quickly and probably gets a horse to come back and joins the Prophet ﷺ and is part of the conquest of Mecca. So in the life of the Prophet ﷺ, we've got four main uncles that we've talked about in the Seerah. Obviously, these are the brothers or half brothers of the Prophet ﷺ's father, which was Abdullah. And of these four, there were many other uncles, but most of them passed away before prophethood started, so we don't have any information about them. But what we do know is Abdul Muttalib had at least 10 sons, because when he rediscovered the water of the well of Zamzam, he was with his eldest son, al-Harith, and he said, made a dua to Allah, if you give me 10 sons, I will sacrifice the 10th of them in order to keep keep the well as a blessing for the well, because he felt as if he was going to be overpowered because he didn't have enough sons to protect him. And so we'll come on to Al-Harith again later on, inshallah, today. But also when the process, when Abdul Muttalib had to fulfill his vow, he had 10 sons. We talked about the story about them throwing the arrows, and which basically clearly showed that you're not to sacrifice Abdullah. And again, the people of the Quraysh said, if you were to sacrifice Abdullah, who is the father of the Prophet ﷺ, then this would be seen as a tradition that all the Arabs would then have to do, because if the great Abdul Muttalib sacrifices his 10th son, surely all other people would see that as something that they needed to do. So Al-Abbas is one of the children of Abdul Muttalib. The others that we've talked prominently in the Seerah, obviously, as well as Al-Abbas, is Hamzah, Abu Talib, and Abu Lahab. And obviously, two of these became Muslim, two of them were not Muslim. Of the two that weren't Muslim, you've got one of the most vicious enemies of Islam, Abu Lahab, and then you've got one of those who is closest to Islam without becoming a Muslim, Abu Talib. So of his four prominent uncles, two non-Muslims, one is of a very, very lowly status, Abu Lahab, and Abu Talib is of the least lowest status, but still did not become a Muslim even on his deathbed. Then there's two that did become Muslim. Hamzah, who we talked about, who is known as the Sayyid of the Shuhada, who obviously passed away, was martyred in the Battle of Uhud, who essentially became Muslim almost on a whim, out of pride and arrogance, because his nephew was being bullied, and he said, well, what are you going to do about it? I'm a Muslim now. But then Allah guided him to sincerely become a good Muslim. We talked about the story of Hamzah's conversion. And then there's Al-Abbas. Now, some people say he accepted Islam whilst the Prophet ﷺ was in Mecca, but there's no authentic narration about that. Some other scholars say that he actually was a secret Muslim, or he became a Muslim before the Battle of Badr. And they use evidence that basically the Prophet ﷺ said that, and this was one of the commands before the Battle of Badr to the Muslims, that there were, I think, 3 or 4 people who he said, do not kill these people. And of those was Al-Abbas. And the reason is not that he was the uncle of the Prophet ﷺ, it's because he was forced to be there. So Al-Abbas didn't want to go, but the Quraysh wanted all the prominent people to go. So he's basically forced to go along. And it said that some of these people, when they got there, they just basically put their weapons down and they refused to fight. And it may have been because of that he was captured. He was taken as a prisoner of war. Then when the Prophet saw him as a prisoner of war, he says, you need to ransom yourself. And he goes, well, how am I going to ransom myself? Where do I get the money from? And Al-Abbas is only a few years older than the Prophet, maybe 4 or 5 years older than the Prophet. So they grew up together. And Abbas says, well, where am I going to get this money from? And the Prophet then said, well, what about the money you buried in such and such a place the night before you left for Badr? And you told your wife, Fadl, that I'm going to hide away my money here. If anything happens to me, then this is where you're going to find the money. And then Al-Abbas says, well, how did you know about this? Only Fadl himself knew about this. This was a secret conversation. And then the Prophet said, well, Allah told me. And then at that point, Al-Abbas said, then there is no doubt you are the messenger of Allah. So it's possible that he accepted Islam there, and then it's said that he became a spy essentially on behalf of the Prophet ﷺ in Mecca. So he would pass on information of what the Quraysh were doing, to the Muslims in Medina. And later on, we talked about how the Quraysh got suspicious of Al-Abbas, and they got a sense that his sympathies were with the Prophet ﷺ, and so they started to exclude him as well. And then there's the other story that says that he became a Muslim shortly before the Battle of Khaybar, and we talked about the story of how one of the new converts to Islam, he said, basically, I've got a lot of property in Mecca, I need to get it back. Can I say some bad things about you after the Battle of Khaybar in order to retrieve my assets? And the Prophet says, yeah, fine. And he went to Mecca and he said that the Jews have defeated the Muslims and they've captured the Prophet ﷺ, and they're going to bring him to Mecca so the Quraysh can kill him. And obviously the people of Mecca were really happy, all except Al-Abbas, who became depressed and was like he was grieving. But then this person, he sought out Al-Abbas and said, look, actually, no, I'm lying. I've got permission from the Prophet to play this trick on the Quraysh. I'm here just to get my money and then I'm out. Wait 3 days and then tell the people the real story. And this is what happened. So Al-Abbas was, the hypothesis is that he converted sometime before that event occurred. And then there's a few people who think that, well, he became a Muslim at this point in time when he's doing the hijrah. So he may have had a lot of sympathies for the Prophet ﷺ, may have been, as his uncle, may have been very sympathetic to Islam and not doing anything against the Prophet ﷺ, not fighting against the Prophet ﷺ, but that he hadn't taken the final step, which was to become a Muslim. So he had the tribal and he had the family allegiance to the Prophet ﷺ, but the final point of actually becoming a Muslim was on this point when the Prophet ﷺ is leaving for the conquest of Mecca. Nevertheless, he is blessed by being the final person to do hijrah, because after the conquest of Mecca there was no more hijrah, so you've got Al-Abbas having this huge blessing of being the last of the Muhajir. Nevertheless, the story is Al-Abbas becomes Muslim. He is the only elder person from Banu Hashim who lived after the Prophet ﷺ died. So he lived for another 20 or so years after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, and he had a huge respect, obviously, and his son Ibn Abbas is extremely famous as well. Is a very prominent Sahabi and has narrated a lot of hadith. Prophet ﷺ had a lot of love and affection towards Al-Abbas as well, and it's said on one occasion when people were saying some bad things about Al-Abbas, the Prophet ﷺ, he gave a sermon, a khutbah, where he said, "O Muhajir and Ansar, verily the uncle of a man is like his father. So don't try to irritate me through Al-Abbas." So basically saying, look, your uncles, your father's brothers should be given the same esteem as you would give your father. So that's, and again, we've also talked about how the Prophet ﷺ said that your mother's sisters, or your khala, is equivalent to your mother. And we talked about that when the Prophet ﷺ was deciding who to give the daughter of Hamzah to in terms of looking after. So again, it's just saying that these blood relations are really important. And I think in the time of Umar ibn al-Khattab, there was a big drought, and very famous drought in Medina. And for that, they did the prayer for rain, Salat al-Istisqa, and in that, Umar ibn al-Khattab gave a long khutbah, and they're praying for rain, and then he said, he asked Al-Abbas to stand up and to make a dua for rain, basically saying that during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, we were able to channel our duas through the Prophet ﷺ. He's the Prophet ﷺ. Now we don't have the Prophet ﷺ. We will do tawassul through the uncle of the Prophet ﷺ. So stand up, Abbas, and make a dua for rain. And that's despite the fact that obviously in the audience you've got very prominent Sahabi, knowledgeable Badriun. Umar gave that privilege and status to Al-Abbas. And one of the other things it said that Al-Abbas, he had a very strong and bounding voice, and the Prophet ﷺ used this in the battle of Hunain, when people, inshallah, will do that in a few weeks' time. After the conquest of Mecca comes the battle of Hunain, and the Muslims are overconfident, but then they get ambushed and they flee everywhere, and then the Prophet ﷺ tells Abbas, call them. So he sort of stands on his camel and he shouts with his booming voice and gathers all the people around. And there are other apocryphal stories that basically he could shout on the top of a hill and his voice would carry for a mile or two to the shepherds But this was obviously one of his traits. But also, because of his closeness to the Prophet ﷺ, the generations of Muslims afterwards, they would use this as a way of getting legitimacy for themselves. So after the Umayyads, so you've got the Prophet, after the Prophet you have the Khulafa Rashidin, so the rightly guided Caliphs. Then after that, you've got Muawiyah, Yazid, you've got Bani Umayyah, who are the descendants of Abu Sufyan, al-Harith. You've got Bani Umayyah who rule. And then after Bani Umayyah, you've got the Abbasids. And the Abbasids, they claim their legitimacy to go through to Al-Abbas, hence they're called Abbasids. And it's said that they ruled for, between for about 700 years as a dynasty, between sort of 750 till about 1500 or so. You've got the Abbasids, and again, they want to express their legitimacy as being rulers of the Muslims, so they trace themselves to Al-Abbas, and obviously that's the family of the Prophet ﷺ. So again, that sort of encapsulates the status of Al-Abbas in the Seerah and afterwards. Then also there are two other Muslims, the last of the converts. These aren't Muhajir. These are the last of the converts before the conquest of Mecca. So they are given the privilege in the Qur'an of being converting before the conquest of Mecca. And these two are cousins of the Prophet ﷺ. So Al-Abbas, he meets the Muslims doing hijrah with all his family and all his possessions outside of Medina. Prophet ﷺ then carries on. Al-Abbas catches up with them, and they are now within a day or two of Mecca. And it said, rumors are starting to spread in Mecca that the Prophet ﷺ is coming, but they're not sure when and where. And so in that fevered atmosphere, different people, they reacted in different ways. And so two of these people who were the staunchest enemies of the Prophet ﷺ, who were also his cousins, they feared for themselves, but they also wanted to become Muslims. So it said that they left Mecca, but they didn't do hijrah. They didn't take everything and all their possessions. They came out looking for the Prophet so they can become Muslims. And they actually encountered the Muslim army at a place called Al-Abwa. And these two are Abu Sufyan bin al-Harith. Right? Not the other Abu Sufyan who we'll talk about, the leader of the Quraysh. This is Abu Sufyan bin al-Harith. And al-Harith is the eldest son of Abdul Muttalib. And we talked about him just a few moments ago when Abdul Muttalib, he discovered the well of Zamzam, or rediscovered it. He had al-Harith with him, but no one else to defend him. And he wanted to keep that as for himself. And he made the dua, if you give me 10 sons, in addition to al-Harith, I will sacrifice the 10th of them. And that was Abdullah. So Abu Sufyan bin al-Harith, and the other one is Abdullah ibn Umayyah. Now, these are first cousins of the Prophet ﷺ, but they had been quite vicious enemies of Islam and the Prophet ﷺ in particular. Now, there are two versions of their conversion, their story of their conversion. But you can sort of reconcile them to one of them is that they sought out Ali ibn Abi Talib, and he said to them, you need to go and beg and plead to the Prophet ﷺ for his pardon, and you have to confess your sins and your past ill behaviors, and the thing that you should say is, quote, from Surah Yusuf, what the brothers of Yusuf said. And they said, by Allah, indeed, Allah has preferred you above us, and we have certainly been sinners. So he is basically saying, try and not pretend to be, but use the quote that the brothers of Yusuf, what they did to Yusuf, use that quote by saying, Allah has preferred you above us. And it's said that's one of the words that they use, and the Prophet obviously replied with the next verse in Surah Yusuf, which is, in translation, he said, no reproach to you on this day. May Allah forgive you. He is the most merciful of those who show mercy. But that's one version. The other version is that these two, so they've come out looking for the Prophet. They've come out to convert, confess their sins, and they stumble across the army of 10,000 people. I mean, you can't really miss it. And obviously, the Prophet would have taken the most direct route from Medina to Mecca in order to get there quickly. And so if you are leaving Mecca to convert to Islam, you would take the most direct route to Medina. So, just outside of Mecca, maybe 15, 20 miles, not less than 20 miles outside of Mecca, within a day's journey, they come across the army of the Prophet. So Abu Sufyan bin al-Harith bin Abdul Muttalib, as we said, his father is Al-Harith, who is the eldest son of Abdul Muttalib. Al-Harith, he died before the Prophet was born, probably. The second, Abdullah ibn Umayyah ibn al-Mughira, he's another cousin. His mother is Aatika, and we've talked about Aatika. Aatika is the aunt of the Prophet ﷺ. She's the daughter of Abdul Muttalib. So Aatika is the aunt of the Prophet ﷺ, and we talked about her because she's the one that saw the dream of the Battle of Badr, where there's somebody shouting on top of a camel and on top of the Kaaba, and then the rock explodes, and then the fragments of the rock go into every house in Mecca. And she tells that dream, or she tells that to Al-Abbas and says, keep it a secret. But then soon everyone finds out. And then the Quraysh got really upset because they're saying, first of all, Banu Hashim, they're not content with having a prophet in their midst. Now they claim to have a prophetess, somebody who sees the future. So this is Aatika. So Aatika is Abdullah ibn Umayyah ibn Mughira's mum. So Abu Sufyan al-Harith is the cousin of the Prophet ﷺ on the father's side, the father's brother. And Abdullah ibn Umayyah ibn al-Mughira is the first cousin on the Prophet ﷺ from the father's side, but the father's sister. Okay, but in Mecca, these were two very prominent enemies of Islam. Abu Sufyan bin al-Harith, he was known to be a good poet. And again, we talked before how poetry was the main media of the day. If you wanted to get information out there, if you wanted to discredit someone, if you wanted to spread lies or fake news, or discredit somebody, if you wanted to trend something or hashtag, you would do it through poetry. And those were the things that would spread literally like wildfire. They would go viral if the poetry was good. And Abu Sufyan bin al-Harith was very good at poetry, so his poetry would go viral very quickly. And he would use that against the Prophet ﷺ and against the Muslims. And he would mock the Muslims, he would mock Islam, he would ridicule the Prophet ﷺ. And these were generally unforgivable things in those days, because there's the worst type of slander, especially coming from your own cousin. And then there's Abdullah ibn Umayyah, which we've talked very briefly about many years ago. The Prophet, he's doing dawah in Makkah, public dawah, and he's inviting people to Islam. And his cousin, Abdullah ibn Umayyah, he stands in front of the Prophet, in front of the Darul Nadwa, their parliament, the Nadi, and he's face to face with the Prophet, and he's mocking him to his face. And he's clearly proclaiming with all arrogance to the Prophet, and he's saying, "Oh Muhammad, your people have given you so many offers," and this was in the time when we talked before about when Abu Talib was trying to negotiate with the Prophet, said, "Look, if you want to be king, we'll make you king. If you want money, we'll give you all the money. If you want, to have women, we'll, just tell us which women you want, and we'll get them married to you. Tell us what you want, and we'll give you anything. But just stop making this, doing this dawah." And then Prophet rejected that, and one of the well-known hadith is, if you put the sun in my right hand, moon in my left, tell me to stop doing this, I'm not going to do it. And then on the back of that, Abdullah ibn Umayyah, the Prophet's first cousin, comes to him in front of everybody in public, says, "Oh Muhammad, your people have given you so many offers and you've refused them all. And they've asked you for wealth from your God." And we've talked before about this, how the Quraysh said, "Look, why don't you get Allah, if you really are a prophet, to turn this mountain or Uhud into gold," right? And the Prophet, he refused. Or the Prophet, he was given this reality check that if that was to happen, and the people still didn't believe, they would then have to die, right? Because that's the way of thinking. If you demand a miracle and Allah brings that miracle, yet you don't believe, well, then there's only one option for you. So Prophet, he decided not to ask for the mountain of gold. And this is one of the complaints of Abdullah ibn Umayyah. So look, we've asked you for wealth from God, turn this mountain into gold, and you've refused to give us that. So I swear by Allah, and you might be able to remember this, I swear by Allah that I'm never going to believe you until you climb up into the sky on an invisible ladder or whatever. You get taken up into the sky in front of my eyes. And then with that sort of divine ladder, you go taken up into the heavens. You then meet Allah and you bring down a book from Allah. And you also bring down some angels so that you can show us. And then he says, well, even if you do that, I'm not sure I'm still going to believe you. So blatantly mocking him to his face, do all of this. Well, even if you do that, I don't think I'm going to believe you anyway. And Allah quotes Abdullah ibn Umayyah in the Qur'an, this conversation where he's asking for these things, right? So this shows you the height of the arrogance and the enmity and the hatred of the Prophet ﷺ and Islam that these two people had, and it's quite possible that they got a sense that if the Prophet ﷺ was to conquer Mecca, they would be on the blacklist. And there was a blacklist where the Prophet ﷺ said on the conquest of Mecca, if you find person X, Y, Z, P, Q, and R, kill them wherever you find them. Even if they're hanging onto the drapes of the Kaaba, kill them wherever you can find them. So they probably got a sense that actually if the Prophet ﷺ comes to Mecca, we're going to be on that blacklist. So we need to convert before he comes. So it's said that Abdullah ibn Umayyah, his father is the father of Salama. So Abdullah's father is the father of Salama. So Abdullah and Salama are half siblings, step siblings. So Abdullah ibn Umayyah, he goes to Salama his sister, or half sister, and he begs her, look, can you do something for us, for me, Abdullah, and Abu Sufyan bin al-Harith? Can you intercede from the Prophet for us? And then Salama, and we know what a kind-hearted person she is, and the reputation she has. So she has a tender spot for them. So then she goes into the tent of the Prophet ﷺ and says, Ya Rasulullah, your cousins are here. Can you do something for them? Can you help them out? They're here, they're contrite, they wanna do something. And the Prophet ﷺ, he's there, he's with 10,000 people. He knows what he's gonna do. And as I say, he may even have these people on his blacklist. And so he turns to Salama and he says, basically, I don't want to hear about them. Right? I want nothing to do with them. Or some of the translations, I don't have any need for them. Basically, he's turning them away. So look, what am I going to do with them now? Right? I've got 10,000 people with me and I'm coming to conquer Mecca. What do they want? And so he's very abrupt towards these two people who have come to try to convert to Islam for whatever reasons are in their hearts. And the Prophet said, basically, I don't want to do anything. And then, she probably tries again, as the wife, but then he says, look, no, sorry, no can do. So she then comes out and says, look, I'm sorry, the Prophet is not going to see you today. No one's allowed to see him. And then when she says that, then obviously Abu Sufyan and Abdullah ibn Umayyah, they get a sense of doom. But then Abu Sufyan, and this might have been a test for them from the Prophet ﷺ, by being harsh towards them to see, are they genuine? How will they react to that? So then Abu Sufyan outside the tent, because he's seen his sister go into the tent and and then come out. So Abu Sufyan, he starts raising his voice, causing a commotion and begging to see the Prophet ﷺ, begging for an audience. And then he grabs the hand of his son, Ja'far ibn Abu Sufyan, and he's shouting out, if you don't let me come in, then I swear by Allah that my son and I, we will leave here and we will just walk into the desert and we will die a miserable death in the desert, right? I've come out here, I haven't got any provisions with me. I'm not going back to Mecca. You're not going to see me. I might as well die. And I'm going to go into the wilderness and die. So a bit melodramatic. You could say a bit of emotional blackmail, but again, Abu Sufyan bin al-Harith, he's a poet. He knows how to get the message across. He's a master propagandist. So he knows which buttons to press. And obviously, that softened up the Prophet ﷺ's heart. And it may have been on this occasion where he then, gave the verse, said the verse from Surah Yusuf, that Ali said, you need to say this, by Allah, indeed, Allah has preferred you over us, and we have certainly been sinners. So anyway, the Prophet ﷺ, he then, granted them audience. And then when he's inside, Abu Sufyan, again, being the propagandist and the poet, he reels off a long poem. And in that poem, he's there with Abdullah, and in that poem, he's basically saying, look, somebody guided me other than myself to Allah, and obviously meaning the Prophet ﷺ. And then he said, look, a guide came to me even though I repelled him at every opportunity, but he continued to guide me. And this is apparently a beautiful long poem. And then as he's saying that line, that this guide whom I repelled at every opportunity, but he continued to guide me, Prophet ﷺ, again, you can get a sense of how hurt the Prophet ﷺ has been. and how much, how much this would have stung him back in the day. Prophet he leaned over to Abu Sufyan and patted him on the chest as in a fraternal way and said, "Yes, you repelled me every time you could." Right? So the Prophet, he's accepting this ode, he's accepting this confession, and he is reinforcing it. Yeah, actually, you did repel me at every opportunity, right? So they've grown up together. They're cousins, and we've talked before how important the family kinship ties are. And then when your own cousins, like your brothers, and the process of being an orphan, these are the closest he has to brothers and sisters, right? When your own brothers turn against you, that has got to hurt. And the process was saying, yeah, actually, that did hurt. You did repel me at every time you could. But anyway, he accepts their Islam, and Abu Sufyan bin al-Harith, he, it's said that, he became a very strong Muslim. And again, in the Battle of Hunain, which we'll do, after, inshallah, the conquest of Mecca, we've talked about how Al-Abbas, he's calling everyone back to the Prophet. Abu Sufyan bin al-Harith, he plays a pivotal role as well, because as the Quraysh are fleeing, he stands up and he shouts and he chastises the Quraysh and basically says, look, don't be the last people to enter into Islam and be the first people to leave. What a dishonor it is to be the very last people to become Muslim, conquest of Mecca, and yet to be the first people to leave. And being Quraysh, you are the family of the Prophet, you are his tribe. And again, that sort of powerful speech, as a propagandist, he knows what to say at the right point of time, and that has a really impactful consequence in the Battle of Hunain. The Quraysh suddenly they're mesmerized by the assault in the Battle of Hunain, but then they come to their senses, partly through this intervention. So that's the story of the last of the converts and the last of the Muhajir before the conquest of Mecca, right? And then it said the Muslims carried on marching, and then they got to a place called Al-Qadid, where there's a well and there's water available, and this is literally a day outside of Mecca. And the Prophet ﷺ, when they got there, he broke his fast. He asked for some water, and then he broke his fast. And therefore indicating to everyone else that this is Ramadan, they need to stop their fast now. They don't need to fast. So they broke the fast, and then they moved on. I think the final stopping point is Mar al-Zahran, where they camped the night ready to launch the attack to Mecca the following day. So that's we'll finish the story there. Next week, inshallah, we'll talk about how the other Abu Sufyan, the leader of the Quraysh, he encounters the Muslims, and then how he converts, and the story behind that, inshallah, which is again the prelude to the conquest of Mecca, and then will be the actual entering into Mecca, inshallah. So Jazakallah khair, thank you very much. Do remember the Ummah and us in your du'as. Jazakallah khair. وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum.